This morning, Rita read so beautifully the story of Tabitha and the raising of her by Peter. It's a story that we hear in the context of death's power and dominion being contested and life restored again, renewed through the presence and the actions of a close-knit community of love in action. I love that Tabitha, or Dorcas, means gazelle, being willing to be lifted up, being willing to leap forward into life. As Peter raised her up, we're reminded of the strength of gathered community and the power of love over the forces of death. On this Earth Sunday, it's a good day to commit ourselves again to the call to being life givers instead of life takers, and to be tenders instead of hoarders. Today, we have to ask ourselves some tough questions, even as we celebrate and give thanks for our beautiful earth. Where is death's power holding out against life, endangering those who are poor and powerless? What is the state of the beauty of our earth, and how is it being destroyed and disfigured? The call of Easter and of all communities who live on the other side, this side of Easter, is to simply go there, go to that place. As we read of Peter this morning, he went there to defy death and to empower new life to begin again. We don't need to go very far, do we, to comprehend where the need is the strongest and where the most vulnerable need attention. We're standing on the earth. We're standing this morning on the earth, and our precious earth is in need of our attention and our willingness to commit acts of death-defying power and energy now. We live in a world where the greed of some, often the wealthy and the powerful nations, overshadows the immense need of impoverished nations and people. Climate change, global warming, affects all of us, but it affects most deeply and powerfully those who live in poor nations, especially women and children and the most vulnerable among us. In our recent history, violence and riots broke out in Haiti, in Egypt, and Indonesia, and the Philippines after severe weather affected the food production and prices. As the average global temperature rises, it has a trigger effect, which is aggravated among the poorest of nations. As farmers worldwide cope with changing rainfall patterns, they also have to deal with ranges and shifts in ranges of destructive and disease-carrying insects. In the future, do you know that 20 to 30% of plant and animal species will be threatened with extinction? The balance of biodiversity in our world can be lost, causing reduction in crop and livestock, producing a sense of hunger worldwide, malnutrition, and disease. As the frequency of drought and flood increases, the threat of access to water and food also increases. More rain, less access to water and food. In sub-Saharan Africa, 90% of agriculture is rain-fed. Within the next 2 decades, a possible 250 million Africans will experience water stress brought on by climate change. Rain-fed crops could fall by half in some African countries, and in Asia, where melting Himalayan glaciers are causing flooding and avalanches today, in a few years, this will lead to less flowing rivers and less fresh water for 1 billion people. People living in marginalized areas are already threatened in their lives by the disappearance of the kind of life and lifestyle that has been maintained for centuries and generation after generation. So why should we care about climate change? As the most powerful nation in the world and the wealthiest, we can carry on the way we are, developing technologies, providing aid to developing nations, getting serious about driving smaller cars, and tending to our waste. But I believe there is a deeper moral challenge to be faced today, and especially for people of faith. The biblical vision that we have read and heard about this morning is for the healing of all nations, not only the rich and powerful ones. It is a call to be responsible and to help co-create a new earth which is socially and economically fair and just, as well as sustainable. So we as a congregation have decided and can continue to decide to make a difference. First, by committing to learn more, and we have done this. We have committed ourselves to becoming green this year. Our council voted upon it. We have a green ministry. We're sorting our waste. We're using less paper, and we're using less energy. These are beginning ways to raise our awareness about how our life affects other life. But we can also make connections by supporting communities that are affected by climate change in radical ways. Our support as a congregation of Haiti and Africa makes a difference in our awareness, our sense of connection, and our experience. Last year, I went to Kenya to see Water for Life projects and how they are changing whole communities and lives by furnishing simple wells and dams that bring fresh water into dry places. It had an effect on me. It changed my life. It changes the way I think of water, and it changes the way I think about community and church. One afternoon, we drove up for about 2 hours into the mountains along a very rough road, bouncing along. When we arrived at a remote village, the community who welcomed us came out and led us in dance, and then proudly showed us their water system, very primitive, very primary, but very remarkable. With that one single water system, they changed the entire culture of the way they look at food and water, grew a community garden which feeds people all over the mountains. They were able to live in and to sustain an entire community because of one simple act, that of putting a well in the midst of them. I'm wearing tennis shoes this morning because I'll be walking through Berkeley this afternoon with many of you for the cause of hunger and poverty, here at home and also around the world. We're walking on behalf of Church World Service, and the primary goal of Church World Service is to create and support a sustainable world, one step at a time. The money raised in crop walks goes to food pantries, food banks, and local efforts here in our community and in the whole United States, but it also connects us up to the hungry and those without water in the rest of the world through CWS's work in international places. It's been a tough week in our nation. In the context of the crop walk this afternoon, we are reminded about what President Obama said to us. It's been a tough week, but we will be all right because we are a resilient people. In the midst of all our difficulties, it's important to remember the universality of suffering and that no nation is immune, not even the most powerful. In the week of the bombing of the Boston Marathon and the fertilizer fire in West Texas, there were a dozen small bombs that exploded in Iraq at polling stations, killing at least 4 people in the country's first election since our U.S. withdrawal. An earthquake this week killed 156 people in China, and thousands more are homeless in Sichuan as the quake toppled buildings, triggered landslides, and basically decimated southwestern area of China. North Korea this week also reiterated that it will not give up its nuclear weapons, a bravado claim which places the earth, which must be fair, and all her people inside a danger zone. We are not immune from the rest of the world's hurts, but we have a stronger obligation and calling to tend to them because of our privilege and our immense power and resources. I'm wearing my tennis shoes this morning to walk for the healing of the nations, for the desire of a healed and restored and whole earth, and for the vision of a peaceable planet, not just for me, not just for us, but the planet and the world. Instead of reacting to the news, I want to know that I am part of a community that talks about love in action and lives from that place. I want to be part of a walking community that hits the pavement so that others may have life, breath, water, and food. I want to be like Dorcas. I want to be like a gazelle, a knitter, a tender, a caregiver, a friend, a developer of community with others and for the good of the community. I pray that all of us on this day will be prophets like Jesus, the name that Peter was given in Acts, willing to give as much as we get, daring to go to those death-embracing places in the world, and working and praying for the life that comes when we are bold and dare to live lives of love, action, and justice. I pray always, always for the healing of all nations, and I pray that we will dedicate our lives and our resources to challenging the dominion of evil with goodness, courage, and hope-filled love. Amen.